Thank you. Welcome to my obsession. Now, I'm going to go down here because I don't want to be the focus of this. I want the team in to be the focus of it because, you know, there is no more famous gangster than Al Capone. Comparing John Gotti to Capone is like comparing a lizard to a T-Rex. Movie stars and foreigners would come to Chicago just to get a glimpse of him. He was so iconoclastic, he made the cover of Time magazine. But Al Capone was a symbol of lawlessness that was engulfing the country at the time. And his acts were so odious that the American Communist Party used it as propaganda. But it wasn't just Capone. There were many like Capone-like gangsters littered across the country. And their rackets were infusing their control over commerce. And if you want to do business, you better pay them. We were becoming like Mexico, where you had criminal enterprises controlling regions of America. Famous journalist and Pulitzer Prize winner Marcus Childs said at the time, in city after city, in communities large and small, crime was subsidized, licensed, decent people despaired. Now, it wasn't the Tommy gun that got him to be so big. It was corruption at all levels. Capone paid 20 cents of every dollar to graft. That was much more effective than a bat. When you line the pockets of politicians, police, judges, government officials, you become above the law, you become untouchable. Now, it was competition, not the cops, that kept Capone up at night. He famously says, hey guys, no need to kill each other. There's plenty for everyone. Now, the newly elected president, Herbert Hoover, not wanting the country to fall off a cliff, in 1929 made it his top priority to get Capone. It was like getting Bet Landed. Now, pop culture leads you to believe that the president turned to Eliot Ness and his Untouchables when others wouldn't or couldn't to take down Capone. Now, the Untouchables might have really reinvigorated the career of Costner and Connery. But it's fiction. There's no evidence that Capone even knew Ness. Ness was not this guy in the front of the boat. He was the guy in the back of the boat looking the wrong direction. Now, aides were telling the president about the work of Elmer Lincoln Irie and his intelligence unit, the T-Men as they were known. Now, the T-Men were created in 1919 to go after tax evasion and corruption with the Internal Revenue Bureau. And in 1920, they were given the impossible task to police the Prohibition Service. Now, Irie was a proven leader. His sweep of corruption of the Prohibition Service, it caused 706 to be fired and another 257 to be indicted. His sweep included U.S. Congressman John Langley and Lincoln Andros, the top official who was supposed to administer Prohibition. Now, the president was particularly impressed with the T-Men. They were getting Ralph Capone on tax evasion. Confident he found his A-team, he tells Treasury to tell Elmer Lincoln Irie to get Capone. Now, the first thing Elmer does is he assigns his top investigator, Frank Wilson, to be the agent in charge. Now, Capone operated his criminal headquarters in 3 floors of the Lexington Hotel in downtown Chicago. Irie's ace undercover agent, Mike Malone, infiltrated the Capone organization for 3 years. He lived in room 724, right next to Phil DeAndre, Capone's bodyguard. Capone knew Mike Malone as Mike Lapido. And it was the information that Mike Malone passed to Frank Wilson that the team were able to take down Frank Nitti, the enforcer, and Greasy Thumb Guznick, his number 2 guy. Now, Wilson and his team, they were relentless in following the money. They knew how much Capone spent on suits, on ties, how much his daily meat bill was, how much he spent on furniture, and even how much he spent on silk underwear. Now, at the trial, all the world was on. All the eyes were on the trial. Malone, still undercover, tells Irie that Capone got the jury pool list. Irie tells the judge, and the judge at the last minute switches the jury pool. During the trial, Frank Wilson and Elmer Irie testify. Also during the trial, remember Capone's bodyguard, Phil DeAndre? He sat right next to Capone during the trial, and he stared down witnesses as to intimidate them. And Malone, still in undercover capacity, notices that DeAndre's got a bulge on his jacket. And during the trial break, Malone throws DeAndre against the wall and pulls out a loaded .38. And he takes him to the judge, and the judge puts him in jail. And at that point, Capone knew Malone's identity. It was a death wish, everybody thought. The jury convicts Capone. And the lights go out on Capone the same day Edison dies. Yeah, how about that? Now, It was world news. The reporters are rushing out of the courtroom. And somehow, Malone and Capone wind up in the same elevator. And Capone looks at Malone and he says, "You took your chances, I took mine, I lost." The conviction reinvigorated law enforcement. Tax collections in the Chicago area more than doubled. There were lines of mobsters at IRS buildings. The intelligence unit found itself famous after the conviction. Its silent investigators became the new folk heroes of America, and its chief, Elmer Irie, was suddenly a celebrity. Now, New York now, not Chicago, was crime central. In particular, Waxy Gordon. He was just as big, just as murderous, and probably way more sophisticated than Capone. The president was so pleased with what happened in Chicago that he sends a letter to the Department of Justice and he says, "Hey, why don't you do the same thing you did in Chicago and New York?" He says in the letter, "I believe such an activity might be salutary to the country." So Irie goes to New York and he works with a young prosecutor by the name of Thomas Dewey. And the team-in sweep in New York was so successful that not only did they indict Waxy Gordon, but there were 47 indictments, including major gangsters and politicians. Waxy was on the lam, though, when they indicted him. But somehow Malone tracked him down the Catskills Mountains to a cabin. Now, the notoriety Dewey gained from the sweep enabled him to be governor. He ran for president, and he almost won over Truman. But during the time that Irie was working with the difficult, challenging Dewey, he was given a Sherlock Holmes assignment. He was ordered to go to Hopewell, New Jersey, and meet with the most famous man on earth, Charles Lindbergh. It was a crime of the century, the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby. Remember when baby Jessica fell down the well and everybody was captivated? Imagine the world. That's what it was when the Lindbergh baby was kidnapped. And everybody believed it was gangsters. Everybody. In fact, famous reporter Arthur Bisbane, believing it was gangsters, he goes to Capone's prison and interviews Capone. And Capone says, "I know the gangsters that did it. Just let me out temporarily, and I'll have the baby back into the parents." Well, the team-in knew. The team-in knew he was lying. Millions read the article, including Charles Lindbergh. And Charles Lindbergh blows off an offer by J. Edgar Hoover to take over the investigation, and he reaches out to his good friend in Treasury and asks for Elmer Irie and the team-in. And it was Irie that convinced Lindbergh to record all the serial numbers of the $50,000 they were going to pay. It was $5,150 bills, and it took 14 clerks 8 hours to do it. And it was Wilson that convinced them to use gold certificates that were very rare in circulation. And it was the serial numbers and the gold certificates that led to the capture of Bruno Hampton, the kidnapper and killer of the baby. And during the trial, Wilson testifies. And he established that all the money that was at Bruno Hampton's house or apartment, the $14,600, all of it matched that list the team-in had. And he also established during the time that Lindbergh paid $50,000 in ransom, Bruno Hampton had unexplained wealth of $49,864. That's how good they got at following the money. After the trial, Lindbergh hands Irie a note, and it says, "If it had not been for your organization being on the case, Hampton would not be on trial, and your organization deserves full credit for his apprehension." And the team-in continue. They take down Tom Pendergast. They take down Leon Gleckman, the Al Capone of the Northwest. They take down Dutch Schultz, Wacky's competition, founding member of Murder, Inc. They take down Johnny Torrio, Capone's mentor. They even go after the Huey Long gang, and there's Malone, deep cover. Huey Long was the most epic example of corruption during that time. The whole state was for sale. And then Enoch Nucky Johnson. I hate to ruin the ending of Boardwalk Empire, but it was the team-in that finally brought down Enoch Nucky Johnson. And guess who put the cuffs on Enoch Nucky Johnson? It was Mike Malone. They even saved Hollywood because Capone's outfit was on track to take 50% through their racket, and they saved Hollywood. For it was the intelligence unit, and this fact is undisputed among impartial law enforcement authorities, that almost single-handedly broke the back of organized crime in the United States during the 20s and 30s. In 1936, Frank Wilson becomes the chief of Secret Service. He revolutionized how they conduct counterfeit investigations and how they protect the president. And it was Frank Wilson that protected FDR during World War II with the same tenacity as he did when going after Capone. Now, the president, when we entered World War II, did not have a bulletproof car, a limo. Only J. Edgar did. So what does Wilson do? He takes the vehicle that they seized from Capone, which is bulletproof. He retrofits it, and that's what he used to drive FDR to Congress to give the Day of Infamy speech. Henry J. Morgenthau was so impressed with Elmer Irie's leadership that he made him the co-coordinator of all Treasury law enforcement in 1937. And 65% of all federal prisoners there were put there as a result from agencies under Irie. In 1940, Congressman John Cochran reads into the congressional record in front of all his fellow congressmen all the accomplishments of the team men. Capone, Waxy, Torrio, Nucky, the Lindbergh baby, Gleckman, on and on. Now, during the time, J. Edgar Hoover's G-men were getting a lot of credit for the teammen's work. And hinting why, he says in the congressional record, he says, this organization has no publicity agent, nor information service. It's not on the first page of the papers every day. But he says, if the true story of his activities, Irie's, could be put in a book form, it would be a class as one of the best sellers in the United States. Now, Cochran was probably telling his fellow congressmen, trying to point out the impeccable timing of the team-men. Because during 1940, it was Hitler's blitzkrieg going across Europe, and we were worried as a nation. And it almost seems providential that the collateral effect of the teammen's work, saving the nation from the underworld and instilling confidence and faith in the government, was substantially put in place just when Hitler reared his ugly head towards the U.S., when the nation needed to collect significantly more taxes to fund the war. In one sense, World War II was all about the money. Hitler had us completely outgunned, and we all knew it. And income taxes were dramatically raised to pay for it. It was called the victory tax, taxes to feed the Axis. It was so important that the United States hired Disney to do a promotional film talking about how to file your tax returns. It won an Academy Award. And the man, Time magazine said, is known as America's #1 civil servant, was called into service to promote the tax. And to the comfort of FDR, the Internal Revenue Bureau was branded with Irie's integrity. And Americans had faith in the tax system because of Irie and his team-men. It was a dramatic turnaround from 1919, when the pillars of the tax system were crumbling under the weight of bribery and corruption. On March 9, 1942, FDR writes this personal letter on White House stationery to Elmer Lincoln Irie. And it says in part, over the years, the intelligence unit has become not only a shining mark of incorruptibility, but also A1 service. I know how much quiet pride you have in the reputation of the unit. I'm taking this opportunity to let you know I share in that pride. In 1946, Elmer Irie retires due to severe heart problems. Letters pour in from colleagues, high officials, and dignitaries. This is a letter that Irie received from the director of Bureau of Prisons. He says, things are going to be at a pretty pass when I lose my best talent, Scout. You've really kept us busy for so many years, I won't know what to do with myself. And remember Marcus Childs? He was the Walter Cronkite back then. And he sends him a letter, and it says, your long and distinguished service is an occasion of pride, not only to your family and wide circle of friends, but to everyone who believes in effective, honest government. There were many letters from agents that poured into Irie. And this one letter succinctly summarizes what they all said. The unit carries and will jealously safeguard the enduring stamp of your character and integrity. When Irie retired, the Washington, D.C. Star printed on their front page this cartoon. It's Uncle Sam looking at Elmer Irie, and he's drawn as Sherlock Holmes. And he's reading the book, The Complete Work of Elmer Lincoln Irie, 1907 and 1946. And he looks at Elmer and he says, Elmer, I'd hate to close the record. Even Sherlock Holmes would have been proud of it. Can you imagine what J. Edgar Hoover said when he saw this? Because the paper declared who is the Sherlock Holmes. It was Elmer Lincoln Irie. Now, Irie dies in 1948, and Treasury gave no formal recognition. After his death, Elmer's biographer in the book The Tax Dodgers writes, the story is that Elmer Irie's intelligence unit was literally the last hope the American people had in a running battle with the underworld, the last hope. And then he asks a very profound question. What would have happened to all of us if this last defense failed? Think about that. Mike Malone died in 1960. Still a team man, he passed in his sleep with a gun under his pillow. He was buried in Arlington Cemetery because he was a World War I fighter pilot. Fearless. Frank Wilson gave the eulogy. He said, Malone is the greatest undercover agent he ever worked with. Now, many have a misguided admiration for gangsters because they think they live by this code of honor and loyalty. Let me tell you, that is not character. This is character, okay? Whenever somebody says character doesn't matter, tell them character saved this country. Tell them about the T-Man. And that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Thank you very much, Paul. I should note two of the artifacts that Paul has in his presentation are on display in the museum. So we're very thankful to the family of Mike Malone, the family of Elmer Irie for those items. Just one-of-a-kind items. They're nowhere else in the world.